Hello, and welcome to Season 3 of Podcasting Your Brand. I'm producer Jemmy, providing learning lessons for you to podcast your brand. And I thought we'd kick off Season 3 with a great refresher course, Revisiting Your Launch Trifecta. This podcast is brought to you by my own brand, Flintstone Media. Listen in and let's do this. And first, actually, we're going to get started with a tip today from one of my daily tips. You may have seen, I have started giving daily tips on Instagram and TikTok. So we're actually going to start there with our first daily tip for you today, and then we'll roll right into our lesson. Hey, it's producer Jemmy here with your daily tip, and today I want to tell you something that is going to save your sanity. There's nothing worse than recording what you are sure was the best podcast episode, an interview and conversation, or thought whatever you have ever recorded for an episode ever in life, and it's going to be the best thing ever when it hits the airwaves, except it wasn't recorded. Oh my God! That is the worst. There's nothing worse than that feeling. It's like a sinking feeling when you think you've recorded something and you haven't. So what's my advice? Have a backup recorder all the time. All the time. It could be a piece of hardware, a piece of equipment, or it could be a piece of software. Whatever it is, always make sure you have a second recorder going. Come back here every single day for your daily tips, and also visit podcastingyourbrand.com. I'm producer Jemmy. So yes, please always have a backup recording. In fact, one of my own stories about how I learned this lesson, is actually saved my butt. It's going to be part of a YouTube series that I'm going to be starting pretty soon, all about my journey in podcasting. So definitely always have a backup recording. Oh my goodness, you've got to. But let's get right into today's lesson. We're going to be talking about revisiting your launch trifecta. And what is your launch trifecta? Your launch trifecta is your why, your ecosystem, and your plate. And what in the world am I talking about? So somebody on Clubhouse recently asked me, what is the most important consideration when launching your show? And this is what I thought of. I thought about your why, your ecosystem, and your plate. And I really thought, well, wait a minute. That's actually a really good thing to think about just every once in a while for your show. And as I was in between season 2 and season 3 of this show, I thought, well, this is a great opportunity for me to do exactly that. So what I thought I'd do on this episode is walk you through my process of doing exactly that as I geared up for season 3. So first of all, starting with the why. And actually, the why is something I covered back on episode 34. So I'll include links to all those past episodes I'm going to mention. But episode 34 was where I really dove into talking about your why. And so there are two sides to it, as you'll hear on that episode. I walked you through my mirror exercise, but there are two sides to your why. There's your message or your goal, which is the why for your listener. And for you, my listener, to be quite honest, the why for the show really hasn't changed much. My goal is still to give you practical advice so you don't fall into common pitfalls and traps and mistakes of podcasting. And so you can podcast your brand and be successful. And so the podcast that you have that reflects your brand reflects it positively and helps you rather than hurts you. So the goal in that sense hasn't changed. But on the flip side, for myself, there's a little bit of an update as to what I hope the show does for me. One thing that I've recognized, and it's taken me a while to realize it, but the more that I put myself out there, the better my business does. And so let me marry that idea and that concept, which I've been really good at implementing in every other facet of my business. Let me marry that now to my podcast. So then it became kind of an exercise in brainstorming how I was going to do that, right? But that's coming up in a second. But what I want you to do is just to give yourself a minute to think through, actually more than a minute, a little bit of time to think through, and do this every once in a while. So whether you're launching your show or you might just want to reconsider, refresh every 3-6 months, whatever. Think about where you're at right now. How have your own goals changed? Has the point and message of your show changed? The purpose of the show for your listeners, first of all, has that changed? But then also in terms of yourself, has your goal changed? My goals in 2023 are looking very different than my goals were for 2022 when really season 2 started out. So things are very different right now. And because of that, that's been the impetus for these other different different goals for me. So that might be a place for you to start to consider, is my mission different? Is my goal different? Is my why different? So make sure that you take time to really think through that, flesh that out for yourself, dip back into episode 34 if you have to. In fact, you probably just should just dip back into episode 34 and go through that exercise again and really think how that landscape has changed. All right. So that was the first thing that I did. The next thing I did was I thought through my ecosystem. Now, what is your ecosystem? Your ecosystem is the who can be involved in your show. And, when you think off the top of your head, you might think of a few people who could be involved. But what I really want you to do is dig deep. So this one I did on episode 35. Again, I'll link it in the show notes and go back and do the full exercise. But on episode 35, what I talked about was that your ecosystem really consists of like 5 main parts. There's your business network, your personal network, your industry network, your local network, and your online network. Now, if you've been doing things well in the last, 6 to 12 months and active and going out there and taking my advice, then your ecosystem hopefully has expanded, but also become more intentional and purposeful at the same time, the people who you're interacting with. So take a fresh look at your ecosystem. Who are the people who are now part of your business network? For me, I've noticed, and it's part of my intention as I've grown the business, that my clientele has continued to evolve over time. So that's a new reflection of myself and my intentions with this show and everything, all the content that I put out, all the things. So how has your business network evolved? Okay. I also realized that, and actually this happened at PodFest when I went to PodFest this last month, in PodFest 2023, I was part of the pro track. And so I realized, this is now a different level of my ecosystem. This is now who I'm rubbing shoulders with, are people who've been in podcasting since 2005, since forever, and are really doing amazing things. And so they're now part of my ecosystem. So also take a look at that for yourself. And then, of course, your personal network as well, your industry network. Are there other award organizations, industry organizations that have popped up, new conferences on the scene? Is there a new industry related newsletter that you should be signing up for? Just take a fresh look at it. Take a fresh look at your local scene. Is there a new meetup group that's popped up that you can be involved in that really relates to your show? Is there a school initiative or local initiative or something that relates to the topic point that you're involved in? Figure that out, right? What's fresh on the scene? And then, of course, your online network. So as you've continued to grow, is one of your social media networks, for example, really, really taking off? Should you be leaning into one of those in particular? For me, I've started to really lean into Instagram and TikTok and been playing with those and just been really kind of learning that. And so that's been something I thought, okay, I can lean into that a little bit more. So that's been kind of part of it too. So then the third piece of it was my plate. What's on your plate, right? How busy are you? Because if you are looking at this with fresh eyes, it's not that you're in the launch phase. You might be in a revamp phase, like I was between seasons 2 and seasons 3. That means that you've been doing this for a little bit, right? You've been riding this bike now. You don't necessarily have to think anymore about putting your foot on the pedal and your hand on the handle and doing all that. Now it's become a little bit more routine. So what in the podcast process itself has become very, very routine for you? What have you discovered in the podcast process that you really love and you want to keep handling yourself? What have you discovered in the podcast process that you really don't love? And maybe it's a hurdle. Your dislove of it is a hurdle. I need to let go of it, right? Maybe outsource it. Or if it's just not serving you well, it's a social media platform maybe that you have been leaning into and it's just not going anywhere. Or a newsletter that's just fallen on its face. Maybe you need to whatever it is. Take a fresh look at everything that you've been doing and what maybe you can let go of, what has become easier, what is the landscape of your busyness? And that's in terms of your podcast, but then also take a look at it in terms of your life too, right? Have your kids gotten a year older and a little less needy? We all want that, right? Maybe you got a promotion at work and things are busier for you. Maybe that's the case. Or maybe you're able to hire an assistant. Maybe things got a little bit lighter for you. What does your daily life look like now? And does that affect how much you can realistically put into your show? Can you even maybe bump up the frequency of your show or increase the offerings in some other way? So take a look at your own plate and really, really examine it in terms of your why, your ecosystem, and your plate. Those are the three things that are most likely to have evolved some since you launched your show. And so you want to take a fresh look at that. And if you are launching your show for the first time, those are very important pieces. But I want you to visit all of my launch episodes because all of them are important. Okay. But for relaunching or revamping, refreshing, 34, 35, and 36 are the most important episodes. So those episodes will be linked in your show notes. But listen, the process of revisiting this launch trifecta for me, it led to all of those updates that I shared on the last episode. Okay, so if you've missed those in episode 63, just rewind back to episode 63 and listen, or actually, even if you didn't miss it, rewind anyway and listen back to episode 63 to those updates. Because now that you've heard the process that I went through to figure out, how has my goal changed? How has the landscape of who I'm involved with and working with, how has that changed? How can I get them involved maybe? How busy am I? Right? I took all of that and incorporated that into those ideas for those updates. So that's what helped me figure out that maybe my first initial step, if I want to think, I know these pro podcasters, maybe now is the right time for me to take this from being a completely solo show to having guests, but guests of a particular, very intentional type. And they can be those pro podcasters. So I thought about that. And then I thought about the daily tips and I thought, is that something I really can manage? So I started slowly. And once I realized that was actually an easy routine for me, surprisingly easy routine for me, I couldn't believe it. I realized that I could rely on that as content for my show. So I thought, okay, now I can incorporate that as content for my show. So you'll notice that now there's a daily tip at the top and the bottom of every episode. And those pro podcasters, you're going to hear him, actually the first one, Mark Savant, in the next episode. I thought I'd double drop you today so you get to sink your teeth into both types of new formats for the show moving forward today. So his episode will be coming out a little later today at noon. But my point is, revisiting all of those for me allowed me the opportunity to give more content to you, number one, right? And also create more opportunities for me in terms of my networking, in terms of growing my business and all the things. So as a test case for what you are doing in podcasting your brand, the whole point of you coming to the microphone on a regular basis and providing value to people to help grow your brand, all of that, use this as a test case of how to go from, you heard me in my launch episodes, I talk about, one of the things I talk about with my clients, and I shared that on those episodes, was we'll go through an aspirational format. We'll come up with with all the goals and everything in the world, like this is what we hope your show eventually looks like, right? But then we shave it down to the bare bones. We start with something simple so they can learn to ride the bike. And then it evolves over time. Maybe it evolves into an eventual vision, but by revisiting these things every once in a while, you don't know if it's going to evolve to that vision or have a different direction. But whatever it is, you know that you're going to keep bringing your car back into the center of the lane by revisiting your why, your ecosystem, and your plate. So that is episode 34, or sorry, episode 34, episode 64 for you. And we're going to not just close out yet. There's one more daily tip for you coming up. But listen, if you want me to address any daily tips or anything on this show in particular, or you have feedback, whatever it is, any questions you have, please email me. I really want this to be an interactive experience as much as possible, not just with my pro peers and everything else, but I want to bring you into the show too. So email me, jaime@flintstonemedia.com, but make sure that you're following me on Instagram at Flintstone Media or at TikTok at Producer Jemmy, Jaime, so that you get all of my daily tips and you get them first. Okay, it's Producer Jemmy signing off for now before we get to our final daily tip. And remember, The only thing more powerful than your voice is your spirit to use it. So turn that mic on. Here's the last daily tip. Hey, happy Valentine's Day! In honor of the occasion, I'm wearing my red glasses and my pink shirt, and I'm bringing you a tip about how to find the right life partner. Well, maybe not life partner, but co-host. Guess what? It's kind of the same thing. They parallel on 4 main points. Number 1, opposites do attract. You want to have a co-host who's not a carbon copy of you. You want them to complement your ideas and your perspectives and your thoughts, not just copy you. Otherwise, what are they bringing to the table? Not much. And that brings me to number 2. You want somebody who does bring good value to the table and what are they contributing to this relationship, right? So you want to make sure your co-host brings good value. What do they know about the topic that's really going to be of value for your listeners? Number 3, you want to make sure, just like with a life partner, that you're not the only one pouring in the work, right? Are they going to work as hard as you are to make this thing a success? So number 3 is a good work ethic. And number 4, we're going to be dipping into tomorrow's tip, but number 4 is about good chemistry. Just like in a relationship, you need good chemistry with your co-host. So those are the 4 things that you need. Come back tomorrow for podcastingyourbrand.com for another tip. I'm producer Jenny.
Flintstone Media has been building brands through the power of podcasting since 2014, serving as an award-winning and highly resourceful podcast production house and consultancy firm. Work with producer Jemmy, a leader in the podcast industry, and add a new podcast to your brand's content offerings. From show development and setup through recording and distribution, producer Jemmy and her team will lend their experience launching dozens of successful podcasts and producing thousands of episodes, making creating your show a simple and easy turnkey process for you. Visit flintstonemedia.com for podcast samples. That's flintstonemedia.com.